Colette Heimowitz, welcome to the Keto Camp podcast.
Nice to be here, Ben. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. We're going to have a great conversation, which I believe is going to be very valuable to my audience that are doing keto. They've heard of Atkins. They want to know what is the difference between Atkins and keto. And you're the right person to ask. I mean, you've worked directly with Dr. Atkins, you've written
That's
books
right.
with him, and you've seen a lot of the myths out there. So before we even get to all that good stuff, how did you even get involved with the work of Dr. Atkins? What's your backstory?
Oh, yeah. So I was in private practice working in physicians' offices, and my job at the time, nutrition was all the rage then, back 25 years. It was new, and doctors were interested in getting nutrition information to the patients. So I would go in, set up a nutrition department, train their nurses and their physician's assistants, create diets that address certain diet related diseases like heart disease, diabetes, hypoglycemia, food allergies, and then leave behind, the handout materials for the health professional staff. So I would spend maybe 2 to 3 years in each office and then move on to the next office. And at the time, alternative medicine was the big rage. And so I would set up educational material for doctors and see private patients in their office. My last stop was with Dr. Atkins because in my private practice, I found that the only way I was able to get the clinical results in patients' profile, when they do blood tests, the doctors do blood tests, and you have your profile, and we check their blood sugar. The only way I can get the clinical results with their lipid profile and their blood sugars was to go lower in carb.
Hmm.
So I created a hypoglycemic diet, where they would eat 5 times a day. They would eat protein and vegetables and fruits and nuts, and that worked really well. And then that really stubborn patient that needed to go very low in carb, I was hesitant to do because there wasn't a whole lot of research 25 years ago. So I went to Dr. Atkins and I said, "How low can I go? Can I look at your records to see the results of going very low?" And then he said, "Well, I need a nutritionist. So you want to come work for me so you could see for yourself?" And I went, "Sure." It was
Mhm.
time for me to move on, to my next practice anyway. So the first thing I did in his office was a retrospective study. Now, there was no computerized records back then. Everything was handwritten. But I managed to study about 1,000 patients' histories to look at their blood response and the level of carbohydrate intake. And what I found was women in their 70s and 80s when the HDL of 70. It was like, wait a
Wow.
minute, I can't get athletes to have good cholesterol like that.
Wow.
I couldn't believe that the lipid profile was better, all the risk for heart disease was better, all the risk for prediabetes was better. And oh, by the way, they lost weight.
Mm.
I was more interested in the health outcomes, but anybody that had any amount of overweight on them disappeared. So I became very passionate. It's like, well, you got to tell the world about this. We got to write books. We have to fund research. This is incredible. And there wasn't much research. I mean, he didn't create the diet. He got the diet out of a medical journal that he read. But there wasn't much back then. So we finally met with Eric Westman from Duke University.
Yeah.
And Dr. Atkins went into his own pocket and funded a pilot study that could be published. And then once it's published in peer reviewed journals, scientists get really interested in that. So we showed safety, efficacy of the diet. And then, of course, 20 years later, here we are. We have, 200 randomized controlled trials and independent, done by the NIH, done by universities in private practice to show safety and efficacy.
It's super
So,
cool.
yeah, I know. I was there from the beginning and I loved watching the progression.
Yeah, and everybody knows Atkins. I mean, the Atkins Diet, Atkins books. It's every year it remains to be very popular, which I love. And the question I get asked all the time, and I want you to answer the question is, what is the difference between an Atkins diet and a traditional ketogenic diet?
Okay, so the Atkins diet has 4 phases, the original Atkins diet. The first phase is Atkins 20. That's ketogenic. No different than the ketogenic diet you see today. Moderate protein, high fats. The only carbohydrates you're consuming are vegetables, mainly, because there's not much, with 20 grams, there's not much you could play with. That's ketogenic. And the same as what you see out there today.
Yeah.
When research advanced and we looked at the clinical outcomes, what the research community found and what we observed is that you could maintain a ketogenic metabolism at 50 grams of total carb or less. Now, what I saw in private practice is that the 20-gram was hard to sustain. People would lose their weight and then they'd start adding carbs, and there was always a carb creep and there was always weight gain and then some deleterious effects to their health. So we created the 4 phases, and that was when Dr. Atkins was still alive. 4 phases. So the Atkins 20, and then the OWL, ongoing weight loss, where you start to add 5-gram increments of carbohydrates each week. And then there was pre-maintenance and maintenance. So this way an individual could find their personalized carbohydrate tolerance. Some people had to stop at 60, some people had to stop at 50. Some people could take in 100 grams of carbohydrate and maintain their weight. So the 4 phases of Atkins, once you get above 50 grams of carbohydrate, it's no longer ketogenic.
Mm-hmm.
Then the body switches back and forth between ketosis and glucosis, and it's not the ketogenic. More recently, we created the Atkins 40 program, because what we thought is like, okay, if Atkins 20 is too rigid, too complicated, 4 phases, adding 5 grams a week, you know what? People give up. So we created the Atkins 40 program, which is you could start at 40 grams of net carbs. As long as you're under the 50, you're still in a ketogenic diet, but now you could have some berries and you could have some nuts and a little bit of full fat Greek yogurt. And with more variety, it's more sustainable. Still ketogenic,
Mm-hmm.
but with more variety. That's where we part some ways from the rigid ketogenic diet that's only vegetables and healthy fats and moderate protein. And then more recently, we created the Atkins 100 program. People don't want to go through the 4 phases. You don't have a lot of weight to lose. You're just a pre-diabetic right now. You could do an Atkins 100. You're still taking in half the amount of calories and carbohydrates that the American public is taking in, but you still have the health benefits. So the difference is Atkins has more choices, more variety, more sustainability for a lifestyle approach rather than always staying low. And there's some people that have to always stay low. If you're a diabetic and you want to avoid insulin, you got to stay low.
Mm.
But they're more motivated because they're treating a disease.
Yeah.
Or if you have epilepsy and you're not responding to medications, you're more motivated. You're going to live at 20 for the rest of your life on a ketogenic diet.
Yeah. I love the flexibility in those different plans. And
Yeah.
I actually personally like the idea of rotating the plans. I mean, one time you could do
Yes.
the 20. So do you like that idea too?
Oh,
Rotate those plans? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. It's a slippery slope when somebody has a lot of weight to lose and the primary outcome is weight loss. If you switch from Atkins 40 to Atkins 100 then Atkins 40, you're not staying in the fat burning mode, and you want to get rid of that extra fat first. So when you're close to your weight goal, and if your primary outcome is weight, then my suggestion is to stay low and add very gradually to find your carbohydrate tolerance. But somebody that's young and healthy and they're just doing keto because they feel great and they look great and their bloods are great, and yeah, definitely. I would always tell people you could carb cycle.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah,
Agreed. And is, I think you said the Atkins 20 is 20 total grams of carbs.
yes,
You said the Atkins 40 is 40
20
net.
net.
Why did
The
you do
the
net?
original Atkins was Atkins 20 total. The new one, when we change our advice based on the emerging research, what we found is that fiber has a minimal, if any, impact on blood sugar. And the success about ketogenic is controlling blood sugar and avoiding spikes in blood sugar and too much insulin. So the current Atkins 20 is 20 net carbs.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And for those who don't know, it's total carbs minus
Minus
fiber
fiber.
equals net. So it
Yes.
gives you a little bit more wiggle room, but
And more vegetables.
more vegetables. Right. That's ideal way to get those carbs,
Yeah.
not in different sources. So keep that in mind. Vegetables would be
Yes.
the goal there. Unless you're doing like a 40, you could add some berries, and
Hmm.
100, you have more room. But you're
Yep.
right. Even if you're doing the Atkins 100, which is 100 grams of carbs, it's still less than half of the standard American diet. So it's still
Yes.
low carb, but it's not low
It's
enough to be
moderate carb.
keto,
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
And we tell people don't have it all at once. That you have to spread out your carbs to avoid the spike in blood sugar. So we recommend to shoot for 25 net carbs per meal
That's good.
and 25 for snacks in between meals.
So we know that in America, most people have metabolic dysfunction. There was that study that came out from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill,
Yeah.
2018, which showed 88% of American adults were unhealthy.
Yeah.
What's the main contributor here? Is it only that we're eating a high processed carbohydrate diet? Is it the frequency? Is it both? Is it something else? What are the main contributors to why we have this percentage?
Yeah, it's a little more complicated. It's the environment, that we live in and all the toxins that we're exposed to. It's the inactivity. It's sitting in front of computers all day and lack of exercise. And I think the main culprit, however, is overconsumption of carbohydrates, especially the high glycemic carbohydrates in processed foods.
Hmm.
So, and when the US dietary guidelines are telling people to consume 50 to 60% of their carbohydrates and it's considered healthy,
Yeah.
and every government program ladders up to the dietary guidelines. So the the programs that feed the most needy. That's why you have so much diabetic population and obese population, and the people that are depending on SNAP or food stamps. Even the school lunch programs have to follow the dietary guidelines.
Yeah.
The military have got to follow the dietary guidelines. Everything ladders up to the dietary guidelines. And we've done lobbying in Washington to talk to them about it. It's like the cost of diabetes and obesity to our our government is incredible. It's
Same.
growing at twice the rate of inflation,
Mm.
and it's costing trillions of dollars in healthcare cost. And their excuse to me was, well, this is only for healthy people. It was like, all right, so now you're talking to 12% of the population and ignoring 88% of the population.
Mm.
So right now there's a bill in Congress from a congressman from California, and he's proposing that there's separate advice for people with diet-related diseases,
Mm.
and that it would still ladder up to the dietary guidelines. And you know what? You're not going to change. You insist on not changing and continuing to do the same foolish thing over and over again. Let's have different advice for the people that need different advice.
Yeah.
So I'm praying that he gets somewhere with a bipartisan bill so we have scientists familiar with the research to be able to advise on a lower carbohydrate diet. I mean, the American Diabetes Association has done it recently.
Mhm.
They're
Yeah.
recommending, the Atkins 100 type, 130, but that's still better than what the dietary guidelines are
It's
recommending. And
progress. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
American
certainly
Heart
progress.
Association has done it, has recognized lower carb.
And we've seen the Tufts University come out with that food compass
Yeah,
recently, right? And
yeah,
they're
yeah.
showing, foods to be encouraged, Cheerios and frosted mini wheats, food to be minimized, like red meat, eggs and cooked in butter. It's like the opposite of what should be doing. And
Because
they
they
just
have to ladder up to the food guide pyramid. It's
yeah,
it's un,
exactly.
it's unfor until we change the food guide pyramid, the dietary guidelines.
It's all
This
crap.
will it's
Yeah.
going to continue to make the same old mistake over and over again.
Yeah. So next question is this. You mentioned that the main culprits are processed carbohydrates, eating them frequently. We know that the optimal amount of glucose in the bloodstream when you're in a fasted state is about 1 teaspoon, right? 80 milligrams per deciliters. What
Yeah.
happens when it's more than that? And what is this advanced glycation end product that is created from sugar?
Okay. To keep it simple, if you've ever tried to make caramel, that gooey gappy stuff, which is sugar and protein,
Hmm.
right? When you combine sugar and protein, you get this thick
Like sticky.
And sticky. And what that does is attach to the walls of the arteries and form plaque. Eventually, it gets hard, and then heart disease is right behind it. So, 2 grams or 2 to 4 grams of blood sugar is what the body is equipped to circulate all the time. So you
2
need
to
a
4
little
all the
bit.
time, meaning when you're
Yeah,
eating as well as when
yeah,
you're fasting.
right.
Got it.
And the body will get that glucose from the liver, from
Mhm.
muscles, from any place to maintain that level of 2 to 4 grams of sugar, which is equivalent to about a teaspoon of sugar. When you go too high by eating a high glycemic carbohydrate like white bread, white rice, pretzels, potato chips, ice cream, the list goes on and on and on. Um, you raise your blood sugar, and if you want to know how much it's getting raised, you could look at the glycemic load, GL, of food, and then you'll know how much your blood sugar is going up, right? Every time it goes up, the body knows, hey, that's too much sugar. It elicits the pancreas to produce insulin, because insulin's job is to take that extra blood sugar, take it out of the bloodstream. It doesn't belong there. Takes it to the cell for energy. What it doesn't need for energy, it's stored as fat
Mm.
in the form of triglycerides.
Mhm.
So somebody that's over consuming carbohydrate will have high triglycerides and low HDL.
Mm.
Perfect scenario for stroke. That
Mm.
gives you a higher risk of stroke. So the way to avoid the spikes in blood sugar is to consume low carbohydrate foods, low glycemic type of carbohydrates if you don't want to go really low. Spread them out. Eat a carbohydrate with fat and protein so it
Yeah, good point.
slows the emptying time of the blood sugar that goes into the bloodstream, so you don't get that spike and that too much insulin. And then what happens, why we have so many pre-diabetics and diabetics, 52% of the population, by the way,
Mm.
is insulin becomes less and less effective. It's like a car. Just blood sugar metabolism gets run down. Insulin is not as effective, and now you have insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. With
Mm.
insulin resistance, you have chronically high blood sugar, and then eventually diabetes,
Mm. And then eventually diabetes leads to a whole host of other
heart disease,
and kidney failure,
inflammation.
amputations, yeah.
Yeah,
So you mentioned, a good marker to get done, takeaway for the audience is get your blood triglycerides and blood HDL done. What is your looking at that ratio of triglycerides divided
yeah.
by HDL, what would you consider an optimal ratio there?
I like to see triglycerides under 100
Okay.
and HDL above 60.
So, okay, under 100 for
Optimal.
triglycerides, above 60 for HDL, and then if you do you look at the ratio at all? For or
Oh yeah,
yeah,
sure.
okay.
Yeah,
So,
of
I would
course.
say probably, like, under zero point 0.5 or under 1.0 would be a good
Yes,
ratio, right?
yes.
Um,
And total cholesterol doesn't tell you anything,
yeah,
really.
it's
Everybody's so
nonsense, huh?
fixated on total cholesterol.
It's the
And
number one
here it is,
question I get asked,
low as a
Colette.
1 milligram.
Yeah, it's insane. Number one question I get asked is, I'm worried about doing keto or I'm doing keto, my cholesterol is high, and I'm like,
No, you're gonna
"What
be
else
burning
can we
fat.
see here?"
Yeah. When you're burning fat, it's not gonna accumulate.
Yeah,
In fact, saturated fat won't even raise your
mhm,
your risk for heart disease when you're burning fat.
yep. What
And
what
then the marker that you look for your blood sugar is HbA1c.
yeah,
The
yeah.
doctor will do that, and that's an average of your blood sugar over a 3-month time. That has to be under 6.
Yeah, even better under, like, 5 if
Yeah.
you can, like,
Oh, yeah.
optimally. But, yeah, for sure under 6, right?
Yep.
But to your point, those sugars, including the A1C, might not even change for several years, but that insulin could be just pumping out in the pancreas could be pumping out insulin. So, do you recommend also getting a fasting insulin done to look at that?
Doctors are really reluctant to do that, and I still to this day don't understand why. Maybe it's not that accurate. I'm not sure, but that would be great if you can get your doctor to do it. That would be a nice indicator. But it's only a snapshot. You need to know what's the only way to know that is with a pump. Over a longer period of time to know how the insulin is performing.
Yeah, the way I like to do that, I mean, you could let me know what your thoughts are, is either putting like a continuous glucose monitor or on
Yeah,
somebody, or having them do the finger prick 1
right.
hour postprandial, 2 hours postprandial to
Yeah,
get an idea of how their insulin is doing.
yeah. I think the best thing that's happened recently is the glucose monitors,
Yeah.
because people could see immediately what a food is doing to their blood sugar.
Yeah.
That's been the greatest thing for pre-diabetics and diabetics, because then they learn which foods are doing it without an intellectual learning type thing. It's more kinesthetic, it's like, here it is, this is what it's doing, I'm not going to have that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a
Yeah,
great tool. And then the
yeah.
fasting insulin part, there are ways to kind of work around the doctor. You could actually get them online. Some companies actually offer kits. So I do see that
Mhm.
as a valuable resource,
Yeah,
another tool in the shed, right?
sure.
Going back to cholesterol, you mentioned that looking at total cholesterol is not going to give you much data, but just the role of cholesterol. How important is it to have cholesterol
It's
in the
really
form of
important.
nutrition, but also the proper amount in your
It's a
body?
precursor to all the hormones in your
Mm,
body.
mm,
Yeah, and it buffers the organs, it protects the organs, it's great for the immune system. So patients used to be so proud. I got my cholesterol under 100, and that would freak me out when it was that low. I would
that's
only
crazy.
see very low cholesterol in people whose was totally immune compromised.
Mm.
Something was really wrong with a patient that naturally had that low kind of cholesterol. But that's what they do. They give drugs to drive it as low as possible to get that risk ratio down. But total cholesterol isn't telling you anything. You have to look at the entire profile, and not only LDL, but the size of the
Yeah,
particle of the
yeah.
LDL is really
Size
important.
matters in this case.
Yeah,
Size matters, yeah. So, break that down a little bit. You have the small particles, the large
large
particles. What do they
particles.
mean?
So the large, fluffy kind of LDL is less likely to attach to the arteries and form plaque. The small, dense uh, particles are the kind that will attach to the arteries and form plaque.
Mm,
Like too much LDL is not such a great thing. It has to be in ratio to the other things in your profile. But if it's large fluffy LDL, sometimes when you do ketogenic, your LDL does go up.
yeah.
A lot of times it's because you're losing weight and you have more free fatty acids circulating. But then I'll tell my patients, if it's a result of HDL going up
Mm,
and triglycerides going down, you just have more free fatty acids circulating in your bloodstream. Let's check the particle size and see what the risk is. Now, there are some genetic predispositions that diet's not going to touch. There are some patients that have that gene, and I like to use natural sources of lowering cholesterol, but there's, some patients just need a low dose of statin at times.
yeah, and what you said is important about the LDL. Like, get the particles done. Do you
Yeah.
run an NMR test, nuclear magnetic
Yep.
resonance? Is that what you do?
Yes.
Yeah, and see if they're in the right ratios. But if you see the HDL going up and the triglycerides dropping, that might be the reason why. And it's not going to keep
That's right.
LDL up long term. It could be a
Hmm.
short term thing.
Yeah. With
Do you
Atkins
also?
patients, we would tell them don't repeat the profile before 6 months because
Good
it
call.
takes a while.
Yeah.
The first thing that to respond is triglycerides plummet. Then next, when triglycerides go down, then HDL goes up.
Hmm.
Total cholesterol will go up temporarily. LDL will go up temporarily, but eventually, in long term, 6 months to a year, it'll improve as long as you're sticking to the
That's good.
program.
Do you also look at inflammatory markers like
Oh yeah,
hsCRP, fibrinogen, homocysteine? What are your favorite
yes.
ones to get?
I liked homocysteine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty good indicator for heart disease.
And could you explain what that's looking at? Like, what is homocysteine?
It's just about inflammation in the body.
Mhm.
That's why COVID played such havoc with our population, because
Mm.
we're already inflamed from too much insulin, from being overweight and obese, from eating inflammatory type foods, and that was a disease of inflammation.
Yeah, so true, so true.
Yeah.
That conversation should be around metabolic health,
Oh
absolutely.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on protein? Some keto advocates recommend, all the protein you can get. Some say low protein, some say I know Atkins is more moderate, but what are your thoughts on like the total amount of protein to consume
You
and
know.
the types, like plant versus animal?
Yeah. Um, it depends.
Yeah.
So when you're aging, you need a little more
Mhm.
because you're not turning over. You're losing muscle, and you want to retain as much muscle as possible. When you're working out and building muscle, you need more. But I try as a general rule to tell people never to go over 30% of total calories. That's too much protein is not good. It stresses the kidneys. It will turn to glyconeogenesis, will turn it to blood glucose. Not as much as carbs do, but some to some extent. Um, but a general rule that's pretty safe. If you keep it under 30% of total calories, you're in a safe zone. In some cases, in a ketogenic diet, they like it at a 20% mark.
Hmm. Okay. And what about fasting? Are you a fan of intermittent fasting? What about something called
Honestly,
fat fasting?
with a clean ketogenic diet, I don't think you need it. It's not going to hurt anybody. It's a good practice to do for detox purposes and to clear out any extra insulin and blood sugar. So I tell people that are on the strict ketogenic diet, you only need to do 12 to 18 hours. You don't need to do longer than that. Um, and I find if you do longer than that, it throws off your appetite cues. There's a certain calorie requirement that you have. When you don't meet it, the signals of hunger will go to the brain, and your signals won't be the same as what your physiological needs are. So I like the idea. 12-hour fast is good for anybody, just
Hmm.
for your digestion and better sleep and all of that. 18 hours okay for detox, but honestly, if you're on ketogenic, I don't find it necessary.
Got it. So you are a fan of intermittent fasting, 12 to 18 hours, but
Yeah.
longer than that, not necessary.
Not necessary if you're on keto. You're already detoxing. You don't have spikes in blood sugar and insulin.
I've seen people who do keto naturally begin to intermittent fast as just like a byproduct of feeling satiated
Yeah,
and
because
full, right?
you're not as hungry. Yeah.
Yeah. You have a book, which is the Atkins 100, one of your books, but wh is that your latest book, the Atkins 100?
Yeah. The this one, Eat Right, Not Less, Atkins.
Yep,
We went through this is when we went through in more
there you go.
detail about the Atkins 100 program. But what I think we did here that's so brilliant, and we showed people how to do in columns right next to each other. Here's what Atkins 20 looks like. Here's what Atkins 40 looks like. Here's what Atkins 100 looks like.
Oh, cool.
So you could see not much difference. You know what I mean? You're just adding maybe a starchy vegetable at a Atkins 100, but in a controlled portion. Maybe a tablespoon of chickpeas. You're not going crazy with carbs in Atkins 100. So you get to see in the book exactly the difference between the three, and then you could choose what level that you think you could sustain, because the most important thing is sustaining it. The worst thing is to go from high fat, low carb, moderate protein to high carbohydrate, and now you're
Mhm.
used to eating a lot of fat and you're still eating a lot of fat. That's the worst combination: high fat, high carb.
Mhm.
And to go back and forth like that is no good. You have to find something that you can sustain, which is why we have so many options for people.
That's great. Yeah, we'll put a link for that book and all your books, in the notes below. What advice would you give somebody who maybe they've been doing keto, or one of these Atkins plans for 3 months, and they've gotten some results, but they feel like the results are slowing down? What are some things to kind of break that stall?
Well, there's several things you have to look at. Are you under more stress? Stress has a
Mm,
profound effect on your weight and your health. Have you done a carb creep? Have you gone beyond your carbohydrate tolerance? Um, and and sometimes we just don't know. I mean, sometimes the body just needs a break from weight loss. All the toxins that we have stored in our body is in our fat cells.
that's right,
So
yeah.
when you're burning fat, you're releasing those toxins. And sometimes the body says, "Oh, wait a minute, I need some time to clear the liver out." There's a little bottleneck going on. So sometimes I just tell people, no pun intended, wait it out.
Mhm.
If they've gone beyond their carbohydrate tolerance, then I'll tell them to cut back on 10 grams of carbohydrate or go back to the Atkins 20 for a week just to get fat burning stimulated again.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a great tip.
yeah.
I I love that you addressed the stress part first. Could you touch a little bit more about that and how stress causes weight
Yeah.
loss resistance and all these health
And it's
challenges?
all about the stress hormone cortisol.
Mm,
So when you're under a lot of stress, the body produces cortisol. The body then will produce insulin to buffer the effects of cortisol because it's a stress hormone and it has deleterious effects to your health. So now you're producing a lot of insulin without carbs. You're just producing insulin, which causes water retention, sodium retention, inflammation, from excess insulin. So the thing is to find a way, and sometimes we'll do it through supplements. There are theanine
Mm.
and lots. There's other kinds of supplements you could take to bring down the level of stress. But exercise is a great
Mm.
tool to get rid of and control stress. Meditation. That's when we push alternatives to try to get that stress level down because that's the
Yeah,
first thing that's so important.
you're right. It's cortisol is that the bully of
Yeah,
the block, right? So is insulin. When they're around, they're like just
yeah,
causing havoc, right?
yeah,
What
yeah.
role does sleep play with this?
Again, if you don't get too much sleep, the body doesn't have time to heal, and that is a stress on the body. It could, too few sleep could cause your recovery to be slower, your heart rate to be higher. Um, it's important to get at least, 7 hours a night, at least.
Yeah, so true. There was a study that came out. There's several studies, but one of them that I'm thinking about in healthy men after 7 days of being sleep deprived, so not getting enough total sleep 7 days in a row, they had blood glucose levels of pre-diabetic, right?
Yeah,
Because
there you
of the
go.
cortisol and all the
Yep,
processes happening there. It's insane. It's just from
yep,
that 7 days. That's wild. So
yep.
you mentioned the American Diabetes Association and how there's some progress, which is good,
Yeah.
and the food pyramid and this new bill being proposed in California. Like, what do you predict the future next 5 years in
You know
America?
what?
What is it going to look like?
I think we're at a tipping point right now. I mean, they don't have a choice. And the population is sick.
Yeah.
And there's this whole food is medicine initiative going on that I'm encouraged about. The White House conference on food and hunger, I mean, and nutrition, they're looking at diet related diseases. Once you look at the science, there's no other conclusion that you can come to. I mean, the dietary guidelines was very clever at eliminating the low carb research because they have a research library that they produce for the scientists to review and come up with their recommendations based on science, right? But it depends on the questions that you ask and what the inclusion and exclusion criteria is. So, what they did very cleverly is they eliminated any study that had a primary outcome of weight loss.
Mm,
Boom, there goes all the low carb research.
wow.
So now that more food is medicine is intriguing, the top of the pyramid, they're curious about that. And they will include weight outcomes in the next rendition of the dietary guidelines based on an independent study from the National Institutes of Science, Medicine, and Engineering, the NASEM report. They recommended that they look at, a broader array of research. So once the research is able to bubble up for them to consider and look at, then they're not going to have a choice but to. That's how the ADA did it. That's how the AHA did it.
Mm, that's good.
Yeah.
But
So I
what?
think we're in a good place. Maybe not for the next rendition because the government moves so slow, but but if we have different advice for diet related diseases, that'll help.
What about this push of a plant-based diet, the vegan push, which is super strong? They have got really good marketing. Like, where do you
Yeah,
see
yeah,
that going?
yeah. Well, I'm a type O blood, so I need animal protein. I was a vegetarian for 10 years and I had to run like 6 miles a day not to gain weight.
Wow.
Because as a good vegetarian, you need to combine your proteins and get, whole grains and beans and to get some good protein. So for me, it didn't work. I did it because it was a philosophical thing,
Mhm.
so I don't think there's anything wrong with it as long as you're getting your protein. Um, but now that we have such great medical foods and protein alternatives like whey protein, dairy protein, pea protein, There's ways to supplement the diet that you don't become B12 deficient. Um, so, yeah, if that's your thing, there's ways to do a vegetarian diet and do keto. If you're a vegan, it's harder. So I tell people get at the level of 50 or below total or 40 net or below because you're going to need some dairy and some nuts. No, vegan wouldn't have dairy, so you're going to need some nuts.
Hmm.
And I don't know if they eat eggs. Does vegan eat?
Vegans don't. Vegetarians would, but
Right, yeah,
vegans just plants. No.
yeah. It's hard.
What?
It's hard to get. I mean, I understand it because of the state of the environment, but it depends on your metabolism, your blood type, your activity level. Some people just do better with animal protein.
I think most people do, actually.
Yeah,
And I think there's a lot of misconceptions with
yeah,
meat and the environment. And the challenge is this, and I was a vegan for a year and a half, not a vegetarian for
uh-huh.
10 years, but I also did it for more like philosophical reasons, but
Right,
it didn't work for me, and I didn't want to destroy my health.
right.
So the problem is this, Colette, even if they're getting enough protein on a vegan or vegetarian diet, if it's a plant-based protein, it's just not bioavailable. The
Yeah.
anti-nutrients, you have to make them complete. So that's a challenge, no?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yes. So,
Yeah, so there are better ways to do it. I did a blog about Meatless Monday. You want to contribute something. There's a lot of research into just having a Meatless Monday.
there
Do
you
it with
go.
some tempeh or tofu on that day, and or some with eggs and dairy. That would contribute something.
Yeah, the tempeh and natto, like fermented soys would
Yeah,
be a good source, right?
right,
Like non-GMO fermented soy. So there's
right.
ways to get the protein. It's just I think for most
Every
people,
day.
animal-based would be a lot better for you.
Oh yeah, yeah. I found that for me too.
Right.
But I understand it. So I don't want to say no, don't do that.
Yeah, yeah.
People that are health conscious as well as environmental conscious, eventually, like you and I, will come to that conclusion themselves.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
What are some of the misconceptions around Atkins? There's a lot of myths going around. Like, what are the most common ones you've seen regarding Atkins?
Well, that it's excessively high in protein. You could eat all the steak you want. I mean, for years they had, whenever there was any mention of Atkins in the media, there was a steak frying in butter.
That's true. Yeah.
20-ounce steak frying in butter,
On
or
magazines, they would show that. Yeah.
or hamburgers with butter melting on top. And so it's not excessively high in protein. It never was. And I challenged Dr. Atkins once because he used to say, eat all the protein you want. It's like, well, you really can't eat all the protein you want. He says, Colette, they're not going to eat all the protein you want. Protein is satiating, it's
It's true.
self-limiting. Carbohydrates are reinforcing. So if you let them think they could eat all they want of something, they're more likely to try it. And that was he had a marketing mind. Um, but no, you can't eat all the protein. You can't eat 20-ounce steaks 3 times a day. So the misconception is that it's too high in protein and that it doesn't have any vegetables. And if you follow the Atkins well constructed low carbohydrate diet, you're taking in 6 to 8 servings of vegetables a day.
Hmm. Yeah, he is right. It is very hard to overdo it with protein, right?
Yeah,
The cholecystokinin, the leptin, the peptide YY,
yeah,
all these,
yeah. You might do it for a day or two, but that's
and then
it.
you're like, oh, I'm
Yeah,
done.
right.
It's the
Exactly.
same reason why, like, if you went to a restaurant and got, I don't know, like a 16-ounce ribeye, and you
Yeah.
finish that, you're like stuffed. But they bring the dessert cart. You're like, I got room for that, but they brought another steak. You're like, no way. It's different
Exactly.
chemicals, right, from carbs versus protein.
Yeah.
Um, there's also a myth that Dr. Atkins died from heart disease as well.
Yeah.
So you want to address that too?
Yeah. I was there. It was in April. It was a hail rain. So it's an unusual time of the year to have hail and rain and freezing sidewalks. He used to walk to work in Manhattan in Midtown and he slipped on the ice. As
Mm,
simple as that. He hit his head on the curb of the
mm,
concrete curb and his brain swelled. They opened him up to get the swelling down, but by the time that all happened, he was already brain dead. Mrs. Atkins had a hard time pulling the plug because he was on life support.
mm,
Now, when you're on life support, they give you intravenous fluids to maintain the body. But the kidneys aren't working, none of your organs are working, so he just blew up from the
mm.
liquids that they were giving him for a week before she was ready to pull the plug.
Wow.
So there was the There was Physicians for Alternative Medicine. That's a vegetarian front group. No, Physicians for, forget the name of the group. But anyway, it's run by Paul O'Neill, who's a vegetarian. He sent a doctor to the emergency room, the cardiologist, to say he needs his records. He wasn't his doctor. The hospital gave him the records. On the records, it showed that his weight was 260 or something obese, um, and he had cardiomyopathy, which is an infection of the sac of the heart, nothing to do with diet. So of course they wanted to get it out in the media that he had heart disease and he was obese when he died.
That's awful.
Nothing to do with diet. Mrs. Atkins sued and she won the lawsuit because what they did was unethical.
Yeah.
And then I called Paul O'Neill, who runs Physicians for Responsible Medicine. That's it.
Okay.
And so, what's going on with you? It's like you could be a vegetarian. I'm not going to judge you. It's like okay. It's like, but why are you so against the Atkins science? Because Dr. Atkins pushes meat. I grew up on a slaughter farm for beef, and it traumatized me. And I cannot bear the thought of people eating beef.
Wow.
So you know what? I can't argue. What do you say to that?
I mean, it's a very emotional decision that he made, and it's
Yeah.
awful.
Right.
But yeah, it's like, okay.
Right.
See you later, man.
Right. I thought I could do some diplomacy, but
Yeah, no, there's nothing you can do there. What was your favorite or a couple of favorite things about working with Dr. Atkins? Like, what did you learn from him?
well, he wasn't a he was a clinician. He was a really good clinician, not a researcher. So it took some pushing to get him to get the research out there because he thought anybody can come to his practice and he would help them. And we had a whole patient coordinator department bringing them in from all over the world, setting them up in hotels and making all their appointments within a 2-week period so they can get all their tests done before they go back home. I mean, he just wanted everybody to go to him because he wanted to heal the planet. He was really passionate clinician and he really cared about his patients. He wasn't a researcher. And he was his personality was a little cantankerous. Like he would call people names like dietitians. He had a dog that he named that he thought was smarter than some of the registered dietitians out there. So
You
that
might have
didn't
been
that's
right.
the best way to influence people and make friends.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Took a lot of arrows.
yeah, right, exactly. So in that way, it was hard because I'm more of the diplomat and I try to bring everybody in the circle. But he was just so passionate about helping people and such a great clinician. I had a lot of respect for him in that manner.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And
Yeah,
you're carrying the legacy with your work and your books and all the cool
yeah.
things that you're doing. Where can the keto campers, my audience, check you out? Where do you want them to go?
Well, you could read the books, Atkins, www.atkins.com. I have a weekly blog that I post every week. Um, there's a community there where people experience low carbers, could help each other through difficult times, answer questions. When there's a nutrition question that needs professional advice, the moderator will ping me to post in there so you could talk to me within the community there. And the website it has all the information you need. You could search anything. We also have a health professional portal, HCP, so Atkins/HCP.com. All the research is in there. Um, we actually did some food modeling, so we have meal plans that meet all of the macronutrient requirements as well as fiber requirements and nutrient requirements. So you could see what a well constructed Atkins diet looks like in the meal plans. Um, and the recipes are great. They're all original, they're all low carb, and they're all delicious.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put your website down below and we'll get your social media and put it down below. What last question for you is about what I call vitamin G, gratitude, my favorite vitamin. And what are
Yeah.
you grateful for today, Colette?
I'm grateful to be here with you today.
Awesome.
And I'm grateful to be still alive to see hope for change for the future.
Mm, that's beautiful. Well, I'm also grateful to be with you today. Thank you for your tremendous research and dedication and for carrying the Atkins torch. I love that you're
Okay.
you forward. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Nice to see you.